There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Adiba from London is back. It's been so long. I'm so happy to see you, Adiba. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on again.
It's so great. And not only that, but you've read and suggested that we talk about a novel that's been on my radar for a couple of years. It is called And Their Children After Them. We got to talk about that title before we're finished, by the French novelist Nicolas Mathieu, translated from the French by William Rodarmor. Just translated 2020, I guess.
Yeah, so I think it came out in France in 2018, went on to win quite a big award out there, but it was only translated in 2020. And I picked it up not knowing very much about it. I was just more intrigued by the cover and it looking very summery. And it turned out
let me stop you right there, because I love the cover too. Is it a movie tie-in or just a photograph?
I don't think it's a movie tie-in. I think it's just, it looks very Call Me By Your Name, doesn't it? Like the cover for that, but I don't think there's a movie yet. I hope there will be.
Well, I hope they have those actors in too.
So you did mention the title, and it comes from the epigraph, which is taken from the book of Sirach, which is one of, I believe, the biblical books. And I think the epigraph is, there are others who are not remembered as if they have never lived, who died and were forgotten, they and their children after them. Which is, yeah. But I think that tells you actually a lot about what this book is about. It's about a group of people a class of people who we often find all across the Western world, especially in Europe. I can't talk for Canada and North America that much, but it's about, these people who live in towns that are way away from major cities. They're often in the process of deindustrialization. So they're usually towns that did rely on one big manufacturer, one big factory. And once those are bust, you just get quite a lot of boredom, despair, and poverty in these towns. And that's what this author is writing about, is the people in these towns. So, and their children after them, it takes place between a long 4 summers. So from 1992 to 1998. So the first summer after the Cold War ended, followed by 1998, which is when France won the World Cup. And football or soccer, it's a huge deal in Europe. So that was a big milestone in, I think, French history, them winning the World Cup and obviously the end of the Cold War. It's really like a coming of age novel. The main character is Anthony, who's 14 at the start of the novel, and it's following him and I suppose it's friends and other teenagers in the city. So, and also their parents, and it's looking at just their lives across the 6 years.
And those 6 years, but only 4 different summers. So not 6.
4 summers. 1992, 94, 96, and 98. So you definitely see, definitely coming of age between 14 and 20. And yeah.
And they are not in Paris, are they?
So it's a small town in eastern France, quite a while away from Paris. Paris is something that they talk about maybe aspiring to go to. Aspiring for a better life, to go to aspiring to go to Paris and becoming more cosmopolitan. But yeah, no, it's not really rural. It's like just this old desolate town. It's really a coming of age story, but it's more, I think what makes it unique is that it's also a coming of age story for the whole of France as well.
Your written review on Goodreads, which I will link in the show notes, talks a lot about the end of history, the Fukuyama pronouncement after the Berlin Wall fell and all this stuff. So these ragtag, to use the adjective ragtag, a group of teenagers, and they're coming of age. How does the author do that? Introduce those larger themes.
Yeah, so what often happens is you'll see these characters do something or think something or find themselves in a difficult situation. One of the biggest ones is, what are they going to do once they finish schooling or education? I'm not massively familiar with the French system, but I have a French housemate who says it's very, very intense, the French system. So often they'll get to the end of school, think, what are they going to do? And then it's almost as if like a third voice, it's like the narrator will come in and say, it's not necessarily ranty, but I suppose it can be seen as a little bit ranty in that there's not that many choices for a lot of them, especially those from poor immigrant backgrounds or poor working class backgrounds. I wanted to include this very long quote into my Goodreads review, but then I thought it was a bit excessive because it's a page long. But it's about kind of almost a Marxist critique of what was going on in France and Europe at the time, which is the disenfranchisement of workers, and how, you know, it used to be that if you worked in a factory or you worked the land, that you could, I don't know, that there was at least something going on, that you had some connection to what you were doing, and now there was no connection to what you're doing in these small admin roles and 0-hour contract jobs. There's no sense of community. So that there was definitely, you know, a lot of kind of quotes like that where the author would come in almost, or will had his characters kind of, you know, think about these issues.
I'm getting warning bells because that kind of authorial intervention, I don't know if that would work for me. It worked for you.
Yeah, I don't know whether, so it was mainly like the characters thinking these things, but it's very much, you could also tell it was the author's, or the author wanted you. That being said, there were also, you know, contrasting views as well. There was a young woman who managed to get to Paris, was very studious, and was from one of the wealthier families in this area, who was talking about how one could become very influential in France, who the real, you know, if you wanted to be successful, how to do it. So, but yeah, I think I've seen some reviews that didn't like that so much, that kind of pushing.
But it wasn't a turnoff for you.
No, I enjoyed it. I was like, I agree, or this is something I've thought about before but couldn't put into words the same way the author did. So I did enjoy that.
Is the cover deceiving, or is it a sexy novel in some ways, or in certain parts?
It is that. So it's a bunch of teenagers who are very horny, and I think maybe, you know, it's probably the same for most teenagers who are sexual, is that they will think of sex a lot. So a lot of, like, one of the main events in the kind of novel all begins because Anthony, one of the main characters, wants to impress a girl, and that sets off a chain of events. It's them very much looking for sex, looking for love, and there are some quite graphic scenes. I did see someone comment on something that I did realize but didn't think was such a big deal, which is that the author does comment a lot on arses. He's very into
Ass man.
Yeah. I read that comment and I was like, oh no, I see it. It's mentioned a lot.
Well, I mean, you have to keep up your credentials as a French novelist, I suppose, of the male variety. I don't want to fight of that, if that the male gaze can be pretty oppressive as well. So
yeah, I saw some people, I mean, maybe your audience, I haven't read his work, but maybe some of your audience has, is Michel Houellebecq was also compared to this author a little bit because of the social realism aspect of it.
I've never heard that writer's name pronounced. Can you say it again?
I think, I'm going to get it
wrong. No, it
Michel,
sounds right. I've never heard it before.
Michel Houellebecq.
Okay. Well, I'll double check it. If it's not correct, I'll just delete that part. But I've always wondered how you pronounce that. So would it be a too much of a stretch to say there's something Sally Rooney-esque going on here?
It's not. So Sally Rooney, I think, because she writes from first person narrative, it's a very different.
In terms of, there's a social political kind of thing that's woven through, and certainly very erotic in places, but in a way that is elevating rather than. So
I think it's more in your face than Sally Rooney. I think Sally Rooney concentrates more on the relationships between her characters. This one, there is relationships between the characters, but there's so many characters, it's so broad, and it's like their lives kind of mean something more. So they're all, it is, I would say that it's fairly quite a political, or at least a big social commentary, more so than Sally Rooney. I think what makes this book and why I liked it so much is I felt that all the emotions and the decisions made by the characters, it was all understandable when you had these inner monologues. coming from them as to why they had made a certain decision, or why they were going a certain way, or why they'd ended up the way that they were. And he really, I think, humanizes all the main characters. I don't believe there are any caricatures or bad, evil characters. I think I took a lot away from it.
And it's also sounds quite character-based, which is what I look for in my fiction. So yeah, it sounds like a Sean book. Adiba, thanks so much for telling us about it.
Thank you for having me on and letting me kind of waffle on about it.
It gives me great pleasure to welcome a brand new guest to Bite Size Book Chats. This is Adam from Ottawa, Canada. Hello, Adam.
Hello, Sean, the book maniac. How are you doing?
Well, I'm feeling quite maniacal today. Thank you. How are you?
I'm feeling pretty good. Just spent some time out in the sun. And yeah.
You're obviously in a different part of Canada than I am. We don't have any sun here at the moment.
No, we've had a lot of sun here in Ottawa.
So Adam is a voracious reader like myself, and our tastes quite significantly overlap. So I'm so glad that he has come on Bite Size Book Chats for the first time, and he has read and loved and wrote a fabulous review of a book that I had never heard about until I saw his review, and it is published in Canada, published in Quebec. It is called Prophetess by Baharan Baniahmadi, and it is not translated as she wrote it. It's her English language debut, and it comes from Vécu Press.
Yeah, out of Montreal. Yeah.
Adam, your review was fantastic. Please tell us about this book.
First things first is Vécu Press. Their books are just aesthetically super pleasing, like to hold in your hand, the font, the covers, everything. I had read Hotline by Dimitri Nasrallah, who was on the long list for the Giller, who was the editor there. And so I went and I looked up Vécu Press's books, and I was like, wow, Prophetess seems really awesome. And then I got a random message, and they sent me a copy of this book, and I thought it was a totally relevant, well-written book, and I needed to share that. I think that's what our job is to do as readers.
That's right. We
share
are
good books.
Literary influencers.
Yes.
What is the opening premise?
So the opening premise is about this young girl, Sarah, and Sarah is witness to her older sisters. Her sister is like her adolescent sister. They're growing up in the suburbs of Tehran. In present day, it is very, very modern. Unfortunately, all too real. And she witnesses her sister being killed by somebody in the neighborhood. As a result of witnessing this horrific event, Sarah then begins to develop this strange new kind of allergic reaction when a man approaches her. She's covered in hair, grows in hair, and passes out. She can't speak, and when she does speak in these kind of maniacal states, she speaks in Polish. And so it just kind of stems from that, and then it takes on this magical realism, very allegorical kind of tale around faith and trauma, gender roles, and in the relation to that in the greater scheme of things in terms of fame, social media, and that kind of stuff. So it's a very spiritual novel that also touches a lot on women's rights.
Yes, so sadly topical at the moment with what's going on in Iran. How old is she when she witnesses her sister's murder?
It says here that Sarah is 7 years old when she witnesses this murder.
Okay.
Yeah, of her sister.
The magical realist PTSD symptoms. How old is she then? Is it immediately after, or do we follow her into teenage or beyond?
It's in the coming years. So she does eventually end up. It's not into her adult years, but I would say her adolescent years, young adult years.
Within the world of the novel, the people around her, do they react as if, why is this happening? Like, or is it explained somehow, or is it just magical realism?
In the book, these reasons are kind of explained and explored, and then Sarah then finds a way to use these extreme changes in her to then try to develop some sort of a positive change in her world and in the world of others.
What's the tone of the novel? How would you describe the tone? Sounds like it's a heavy story. Is it a heavy tone?
It's a slightly somber tale, obviously based around the modern life of women in places like Iran. And it definitely it's a really well written book, and the magical realism is not used as a to make light of the situation. It just makes it more accessible and relatable to anybody that has dealt with any kind of trauma, any kind of displacement.
Without in any way giving away the ending, is it ultimately is there at least a little bit of hope in it, or is it just really down in the muck of trauma and victimization?
This is a very, very hopeful read. This left me very much, one, obviously just in awe of how real this is and how prescient this topic is for a great many people. Nothing I can never relate to, but yet the story was a lot about like coming to terms with someone's individual like faith and belief system in themselves and in the world and in relation to the world. And it was an extremely hopeful and insightful read.
Well, you've put it on my radar, Adam. I'm sold.
There's 7 reviews of it on Goodreads. There needs to be more. So read this book, share about it, follow Baharan Baniahmadi, follow Recluses Press. They have a great catalog of books that have been written in the past, and then obviously some of their newer releases, which I've also read, which are real secret gems, and hopefully they can remember them next time the Giller list comes up next year for some of these books.
I will put a link to the publisher's website as well in the show notes.
Yeah.
And Adam, thanks so much for telling us about this book, and I hope you'll come back.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Well, it's BookTube royalty time on Bite Size Book Chats. I am welcoming for her debut appearance on my channel and on Bite Size Book Chats, Sarah of Hardcover Hearts from the San Francisco Bay Area. Sarah, hello.
Hello, Sean. Speaking of royalty, I'm quite.
Are you calling me a queen?
The Empress.
The Empress of Bailing, yes.
That's right. I bow down.
Oh, well, right. We're going to bump heads as we bow down together in fealty. So your channel has been going for, I think, maybe about 3 years now. Is that right?
Yeah.
Something like that. And we kind of knew each other on Litzy originally.
We did.
I didn't make the connection because I didn't necessarily remember that your handle there, which was Hardcover Hearts, but then you came onto BookTube and yeah. So tell us what you do over on Hardcover Hearts.
Well, I have to say before I start that I owe so much of my initial welcome to you. I literally had only done, I think, 2 or 3 videos, and you posted something out on Twitter, and I think you also did maybe on Litzy, but definitely on Twitter, and then all of a sudden I had this avalanche of people. So thank you.
I never did get that check in the mail that you
well, you're getting lost to Tokyo, so maybe I'll have to reroute it. But
I could use it right about now, actually. But anyway, please continue.
So yeah, I have been a watcher of BookTube for a very long time, and I decided I was tired of boring my friends, where I was trying to have conversations, like really deep conversations about literature and obscure books and backlisted books and literary fiction and all of that with my friends. And so I decided to join the crowd and start a BookTube channel. And I had very, very low expectations, and my everything has been met and more through just me. What I mainly do right now is just a weekly wrap up. It's just literally a week in review where I just share the books I'm reading, what I finished, what I'm currently reading and about to read, and then just progress with that each week. And that works for me. As my jobs have changed and as work has gotten crazier, I can at least maintain that. And I read literary fiction. I love backlist. I love works in translation. I read predominantly women. I also love, for palate cleansers, I love mysteries and historical fiction.
Right up until you got to the palate cleanser part, I thought you were my doppelganger.
And then I threw a curveball your way.
Not a curve. I knew that, but yeah, that's fabulous. And so we're actually here today to talk about a work of literary fiction that I vaguely knew the title and author, but that is literally it. And when you ended up reading it and loving it, I thought, oh, this was meant to be your debut. It is The Shooting Party by Isabel Colegate, which was published, I believe, in 1980. And Isabel Colegate is still alive. I think she's 91. And I didn't know any of this.
That I did not know. But yeah.
Tell us about this book.
Yes, here it is. Gorgeous, gorgeous cover. I got this from the UK. This is set in autumn, so it's perfect time to be reading it. Autumn over a 24-hour period in 1913. It's set in an English estate, kind of manor house in the Oxfordshire countryside. And it's very much, I love a good upstairs, downstairs story, where you get the life of the servant class, and then you get the life above the stairs of the rich hoity-toities. I always love that. But this takes it even further. You've got the upstairs, downstairs, but you have the inside, outside. And the outside is, because it's a shooting party, the outside are the people, the groundskeepers, the beaters who beat the partridges out of the wherever they're hiding, so they fly up. All of those people that assist in making a shooting party successful. So that's in essence what it is, but it starts off from the very get-go with I'm going to read just one sentence. There's an introduction from Julian Fellows, who did Downton Abbey in this.
That sounds about right.
Right? It says, it was an error of judgment which resulted in a death. It took place in the autumn before the outbreak of what used to be known as the Great War. She immediately tells you what's going to happen. I love a good telegraphing of something like that. And then the tension of how we arrive to that conclusion is done exquisitely.
It's about 200 pages, right?
Very small, yes. And so it's a quick read, but I have to tell you, I read it very slowly because I didn't want to just absorb it. I wanted to slowly, luxuriously be in this world because there's a lot going on. It is a boisterous book. There is a ton of people, ton of action, but it's
what a lovely phrase. It's a boisterous book. That's fantastic. Well, we're back in doppelganger territory, Sarah, because I'm I think I'm very much of a slow reader as well. But I have to interrupt and say, please tell us about Sir Randolph. He sounds like a really amazing character.
Yeah, so Sir Randolph, this is his estate, but he's not, and the estate it's not one of the best. It's very nice. And he really wants to put on a really good shooting party here. And we get, what happens here is that there's never one character that we fixate on. It's a rotation, and it is a fast rotation. And she does something that Virginia Woolf does very well. So in some of Virginia Woolf's earlier books, she would have like a dinner party, and you would move from one person's point of view to another person's point of view to another. And they're all talking about the same moments, but reflecting in different ways. And this is it's a nasty bit of people, a nasty grouping of people. There is a lot of backstabbing and a lot of competition, a lot of adultery, a lot of wheeling and dealing between the people, side conversations, side plots that keep those dynamics really, really interesting.
Sounds delicious.
It is. It really is.
Now it's the shooting party. So it's about a hunt for somebody who's like squeamish or morally offended by that whole thing. What would your advice be? Steer clear of this, or that there's so much else to the story that you could probably hold your nose and get through that part, or what?
It's so well said, because I'm a pescatarian. I've been a vegetarian in my life. I'm married to a vegan. I don't believe in shooting parties. I think the whole thing is pretty outrageous. So I went into this because of the writing. So I heard about Elizabeth Colegate because of Slightly Foxed, the podcast, which is an absolute delight. And
I'll put a link in the show notes for people that don't know it. Yeah.
Amazing. And so I love the cover. It sounded good, Edwardian. I was like, okay, well, let me try it. There is actually a character in here that is an animal rights activist that in 1913, he's like a proselytizer. He's kind of like a little bit of plays the fool, where he says things that bring out such truths that it forces people to kind of stop and think. But he also is a comic character. You don't take him that seriously, but he is earnest in his intent. And I think that, yes, there are really squeamish moments, many squeamish moments, but it also speaks to the debauchery and the opulence at any cost of this dying class of people.
And epitomized by Sir Randolph, right? He's the head of the household. Is he an elderly guy?
He's an elderly guy, but he tends to be, he's kind of above the fray. He's actually more interesting than the rest of them. You know, he's actually brought in, there's multiple lords and ladies that are there. There's a count from I think Hungary who's there. There are all sorts of different people that are there, but I think Sir Randall kind of is above the fray a little bit. He represents the older, but he's recognizing that change is coming, and it's not always going to be this way.
I can't believe that, that this is my era. These the setting, and I like British women writers of a certain age, and I can't believe that this book didn't really ever cross my path. Is she a kind of a hidden secret, or what's your take on the writer?
Same. So let me show you some other books that I came across, and I specifically went looking when I just got back from the UK in May, and I went specifically looking for some of her books. So this is one, The Winter Journey, that looks fantastic. It sounds like it's very similar. Dead of winter and staying in a kind of remote locale. That looks good. But this looks just phenomenal.
I love the cover.
The cover is just amazing.
Statues in a Garden.
Statues in a Garden. And this is put out by Bloomsbury FSC. And then here's another one. This is, I think, what she's most known for. And this is the Orlando King book. And this is set in 1930s London, with all of the politics that happened in the 1930s. So I think I'll probably read this next, because I'm currently reading the Balkan trilogy by Olivia Manning with a bunch of people, also set in the 1930s. So it seems like a nice little way to kind of keep the plot line going.
Well, I have FOMO, but I have a really full TBR until the end of the year, but I'll be certainly following your exploits with it. And I just see that Winter Journey is, I think, her last novel. And then her last book, according to her Wikipedia profile, sounds pretty interesting too, from 2002, A Pelican in the Wilderness, Hermits, Solitaries, and Recluses.
Ooh, how quite.
That sound interesting? Yeah, I might have to buddy read that with you someday.
There you go.
Thank you for telling us about this book. Will you come back?
Anytime, Sean. You just need to say the word anytime.
James from Adelaide is back. Hello again, James.
Yes, hello again.
You read how many dozen books for Women in Translation Month, and one of them in particular, well, so many of them, but one in particular really caught my eye, just the way you talked about it in a tweet, and that is Chitambo by Hagar Olsson, translated, and you'll explain which language, because it's all too complicated for me to try to explain, but translated by Sarah Death.
Yes.
You loved it. Tell us why.
I did. So yes, it's published by Norvik Press, who put out a lot of good things, but they're quite hard to find sometimes. I think a lot slip out of print, and I don't know how well distributed they are outside of the UK, but they publish a lot of good Scandinavian stuff in translation. But yeah, so Hagar Olsson was, I guess, ethnically, culturally Swedish, but grew up in Finland. So similar to Tove Jansson, wrote in Swedish and I guess lived well, like, I guess mainly sort of moved in Swedish cultural circles. But yes, a Finnish writer, just to be confusing.
Very interesting. And what is this book about?
Well, it's apparently one of the earliest modernist Scandinavian novels, but it's about a girl. Well, it's sort of the story of this woman's life, kind of from childhood to, I guess, adulthood. But it starts off, she has a father who is quite detached from reality in many ways. And the two of them, when she's very small, they love reading these stories of adventure. I mean, the character's name is Vega because it was one of the kind of Scandinavian exploration Arctic or Antarctic ships. I can't remember which. He wanted to name her after one of the other, the Nansen or something like that. I can't remember. But anyway, so they read obsessively these stories of adventure and have all these kind of imaginative worlds that they inhabit where they are Arctic explorers. And as she gets older, he kind of loses interest in her because they don't have that imaginative world they can play in anymore. And so he then becomes focused on these sort of strange kind of spiritualistic utopian schemes. There's some scam artist who's claiming to be a healer, and he sets up some commune in kind of rural Finland, and her dad's going to, raise all this money to make the commune a success and get all these people to go off and move there. And he's sort of no longer interested in his wife or his daughter because they're just standing in the way of these great utopian schemes. And she has kind of inherited the utopian impulse, but she can also see the ludicrousness of her father. So she's stuck in this kind of yearning to be involved in some big thing to make a better world. But, her dad's a kind of neglectful idiot. And the people around her are either just really focused on day-to-day life or just not interested in, any of the things she's interested in. So she's kind of left. She no longer has her kind of one imaginative friend that was her father. But she's just kind of bumbling around in ordinary life. And it kind of, that doesn't really give you much idea of plot, but there is plot in there. But it's that, her just attempts to live life torn between these two impulses.
And it's sounding to me like a coming of age story.
It is, but quite an unusual one. The title, Chitambo, which I don't think makes any sense until you get to the last page. Well, it didn't make any sense to me, but apparently it's either the village or the place or the person, David Livingstone, the, explorer and missionary, was when he died, I think. And this is one of the kind of stories of adventure that she and her father were obsessed with when she was a child. I think there's all these pictures pulled out of newspapers and things, sort of etchings and lino cuts from old newspaper stories. And I think one of them is, David Livingstone sitting in some hut in the jungle, on his way towards death. And Chitambo is either the place where he was or the person he was talking to. It's not clear from the text, but yeah.
You haven't mentioned much about her mother yet. I'm just going to take a wild guess that her mother was on the more conventional, ordinary life side of this split that the daughter is.
Somewhat, and also kind of left flailing by the lack of interest from her husband because the father has all these big mad schemes, and because his wife is just trying to live an ordinary life, he very quickly kind of dismisses her from being of any interest to him. So and he'll vanish for a while on some project or other. So she's being raised primarily by her mother after she's stops being a child or a young child, but her mother is such a reduced personality, partly because of the outsizedness of her dad's personality, but also just the kind of constant wearing down from the kind of person that her father was. So her mother is the much more constant presence, but a much less powerful influence.
So this novel was originally published in Finnish in 1934.
Well, I guess in Finland, but in Swedish, yes, in
Swedish and Finland. Thank you for clarifying that. In 1933.
Yeah, 1933. So not a good year generally, but
Generally. Can you tell us anything about the author?
well, I think unlike most of the other people we've talked about over the last few years, she didn't commit suicide. So I think she lived into her 70s. But yes, she was, I think, quite an experimental writer. There's, as far as I can tell, this is certainly the only book by her in print in English. I think there was another one translated in the 60s, which you can get online, but it's, the university press that's put it online, it's almost unreadable because each chapter its own web page. You can't just download it as an ebook. You've got to, so I intend to fart around with it and try and make my own copy of it, but I haven't built up my stamina for that yet. But this is certainly the only thing in print by her, except for a couple of short stories. And some of the stuff that hasn't been translated sounds fascinating. She did a futurist photo novel in the 20s, which I assume is something like those, Italian fumetti books, where they do kind of comic strips but using photographs. But yes, a futurist photo novel. I don't entirely know what that means, but I know that I want to see it. So,
absolutely you do, and then you need to come back and tell us about it.
Exactly, yeah. So someone needs to translate that, or I need to learn Swedish, but
And apparently she herself was a translator and a playwright and a literary critic in addition to being a writer of fiction.
So she seems to have been very, very active in again, I assume mainly for a Swedish readership rather than a Finnish one. I don't know how many Finns, particularly at the time, read Swedish, and certainly there's a sizable Swedish community in Finland, but yes, I don't know how much the Finns take note of the Swedish culture as opposed to the other way around, because it's a minority culture. So yeah,
I'm looking forward to giving it a try myself. Thank you for telling us about this one too, James.
Oh, my pleasure. The more people read it, the better, I think.